The air conditioning in my beaten-up Civic had chosen today, of all days, to die. Not just sputter, but a full, wheezing collapse, leaving me to stew in the humid, exhaust fume-choked air of the afternoon rush. My shirt was sticking to my back, and the faint, sweet scent of something burning in the distance was doing nothing to improve my mood. I drummed my fingers on the steering wheel, a restless rhythm against the muted drone of traffic. For 20 minutes, I'd moved maybe 50 feet. 50 feet closer to absolutely nothing, it felt like. The radio was no help, just static bursts interrupting a manic jingle for a discount car wash. My phone, of course, was almost dead, just my luck. I leaned my head against the headrest, closing my eyes for a moment, picturing the quiet solitude of my apartment, a cold beer, anything but this endless, mind-numbing crawl. This was my life now, wasn't it? Stuck, perpetually stuck, in the mundane purgatory of a Monday afternoon traffic jam. A faint, almost imperceptible tremor ran through the ground, vibrating up through the asphalt and into my tires. It wasn't an earthquake, too subtle for that, but it sent a strange shiver down my spine. I opened my eyes. Nothing. Just the endless procession of brake lights ahead, shimmering red in the heat haze. A woman in the car next to me was meticulously applying lipstick, oblivious. Then, a sound. Not a car horn, not a siren, but a low, guttural moan that seemed to crawl out from beneath the concrete. It was distant, distorted by the city noise, but it was wrong. My skin prickled. I leaned forward, straining to hear, but it was gone, swallowed by the city's usual symphony of frustrations. Just my imagination, I told myself. Too much coffee, too little sleep. But then, it came again, closer this time, and unmistakable. Not a moan, but a scream. Raw, full of absolute terror, a sound that ripped through the usual urban din like a razor through silk. It came from somewhere up ahead, maybe 2 blocks, a knot in the endless ribbon of cars. The woman with the lipstick fumbled her tube. Her head snapped up, eyes wide, no longer focused on her reflection. Other drivers were doing the same, a ripple of unease spreading through the tightly packed lanes. Some were getting out of their cars, craning their necks, their faces etched with confusion. What the hell was going on? A sudden, sharp series of crashes erupted further up the highway. Metal shrieked, glass shattered, and a deep, sickening thud echoed through the concrete canyon. More screams, closer now, a chorus of rising panic. And then, the unmistakable crackle of gunfire. Single shots at first, then a ragged, sustained burst that sounded too close, too real. It came from somewhere up ahead, maybe 2 blocks, a knot in the endless ribbon of cars. The woman with the lipstick fumbled her tube. Her head snapped up, eyes wide, no longer focused on her reflection. Other drivers were doing the same, a ripple of unease spreading through the tightly packed lanes. Some were getting out of their cars, craning their necks, their faces etched with confusion. What the hell was going on? A sudden sharp series of crashes erupted further up the highway. Metal shrieked, glass shattered, and a deep, sickening thud echoed through the concrete canyon. More screams, closer now, a chorus of rising panic. And then, the unmistakable crackle of gunfire. Single shots at first, then a ragged, sustained burst that sounded too close, too real. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the rising tide of fear. This wasn't a car accident. This wasn't a localized disturbance. This was something else, something fundamentally, terribly wrong. I tried to start my car, an absurd, futile gesture. The engine groaned, a pathetic whine, but the cars ahead weren't moving. They were a solid wall. I was trapped. Through the windshield, I saw them. Not a lot at first, maybe 3 or 4 figures, stumbling, lurching, moving with a horrifying, disjointed gait that was all wrong. They were people, or had been, but they moved like puppets with broken strings, their arms outstretched, their heads lolling. One of them, a business suit, now torn and blood-splattered, stumbled over the hood of a white sedan, leaving a smear of dark crimson. Its face was a mask of death, eyes milky and unfocused, jaw slack, a wet, gurgling sound escaping its throat. It wasn't looking for help. It was looking for something else. My breath caught in my throat. My mind, usually so adept at cynical dismissal, was racing, trying to categorize what I was seeing. A protest gone violent? A mass drug outbreak? But the way they moved, the way they fell on the driver of the white sedan when he tried to get out, tearing at him with horrifying speed and ferocity. No, this wasn't human. This was a nightmare. A living, breathing, lurching nightmare that was rapidly turning this mundane traffic jam into a charnel house. The screams intensified, closer still. I could see more of them now, emerging from between the stalled vehicles, climbing over hoods, pouring onto the highway from the exit ramps. A wave of gray, shambling horrors, all driven by a singular, insatiable hunger. Zombies. The word, once reserved for late-night movies and campfire tales, now screamed in my head, raw and undeniable. They were here. They were real. And they were overrunning the city. My phone buzzed in my lap, a last gasp text from my sister Ashley. "Alex, are you okay? News reports. Stay safe. Love you." A knot of icy fear tightened in my stomach. Ashley, my parents. Were they safe, or were they too caught in this sudden, impossible wave of terror? I had to get out. I had to get to them. But how? My car, my once safe metal cocoon, was now nothing more than a sarcophagus, surrounded on all sides by the relentless march of the dead. One of them, a woman in a floral dress, her face a mangled mess of blood and teeth, shambled directly towards my car. Her dead eyes seemed to fix on mine, a terrible, empty gaze that promised only oblivion. My hands gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. My breath hitched in my throat. This wasn't just a traffic jam anymore. This was a cage, and the bars were closing in. I had to move, had to fight, had to escape. But with nowhere to go and no weapon to hand, how? How in God's name was I going to survive this? The floral dress zombie reached my side mirror, its rotten fingers scraping against the glass with a sickening sound. Its head tilted, a low, wet growl rumbling in its chest. The smell hit me then. Decay, stale blood, something acrid and chemical like a bad disinfectant. My stomach lurched. The window was a thin barrier, easily broken. I pressed myself back against the seat, trying to make myself smaller, invisible. But its empty gaze didn't waver. It seemed to know I was there. My heart hammered, a frantic sparrow trapped in a cage. What do I do? What do I do? The only thing I had was the flimsy plastic emergency hammer for breaking windows. It felt like a child's toy against the looming horror. This was it. This was how it ended. Not in some glorious last stand, but choking on exhaust fumes, trapped in a car, watching the world die. Another one joined the floral dress zombie, a man with a torn shirt, his arm hanging at an unnatural angle. They both began to pound on the roof of my car, a dull, rhythmic thud that vibrated through the frame and into my bones. The Civic, already dented and scratched from years of city driving, groaned under the assault. The metal shrieked as a hand tore at the windshield wiper. I could see the cracks spider-webbing across the glass on the car next to me. It wouldn't be long. Panic, cold and sharp, cut through the adrenaline. I looked around desperately. The emergency hammer, it was my only option. My fingers, slick with sweat, fumbled for it in the console. It was small, light, utterly inadequate. But it was something. I pulled it free, gripping the plastic handle so hard it creaked. A sudden violent lurch.
The floral dress zombie had thrown itself against my driver's side door, denting the panel with a sickening crunch. The window bowed inward, a faint, almost musical groan of stressed glass. I could feel the vibrations in my teeth. Any second now, it would shatter. Any second, and they would be in. My gaze snapped to the passenger side. Empty, for now. There was a brief gap between my car and the sedan beside me, maybe a foot wide. If I could get out, somehow, and move over the hood of the next car. It was insane. Suicide. But staying here was certain death. I made a decision, a desperate, gut-wrenching one. "I'm sorry, old girl," I whispered to my car, my voice hoarse. It had been with me through breakups, bad jobs, and countless forgotten errands. Now it was a tomb. I slammed the emergency hammer into the passenger side window. Not once, but 3 quick, desperate blows.
The glass exploded outward in a spiderweb of cracks, then collapsed inward with a cascade of tinkling shards. A rush of hot, putrid air hit me, bringing with it the nauseating smell of decay and the rising crescendo of moans from the highway. My hand, still gripping the hammer, felt strangely numb. My left hand, I realized with a jolt, was bleeding. A piece of glass had sliced my palm. I barely registered the pain. Adrenaline was a potent anesthetic. I shoved my bag, a worn backpack containing my laptop and a few papers, onto the passenger seat. Not my sister, not my parents, but my bag. The absurdity of the gesture was lost in the immediacy of survival. "Get out! Get out!" a voice screamed from somewhere ahead, followed by a torrent of profanity and more gunfire. The chaos outside was a roaring beast, growing louder, closer. I had to move, now. I scrambled over the center console, my bleeding hands slipping on the fabric. My knee slammed against the gear stick, sending a jolt of pain up my leg. Gritting my teeth, I pushed myself through the jagged opening of the passenger window, careful to avoid the remaining shards. My clothes snagged on the sharp edges, tearing at the fabric of my work shirt. The stifling heat of the car was replaced by the oppressive, heavy air of the outside world, a world now utterly transformed. My feet hit the ground, unstable on the broken asphalt between the cars. The gap was even narrower than I thought. I squeezed through, my shoulders scraping against the hot metal of the sedan next to me. It was an SUV, actually, its tinted windows offering no glimpse of its occupants. I didn't want to know. I climbed onto the hood of the SUV. The metal was burning hot beneath my hands, radiating the day's accumulated sun. My reflection, distorted and panicked, stared back at me in the shattered windshield. My eyes were wide, pupils dilated, a wild animal caught in a snare. The floral dress zombie was still pounding on my Civic's driver's side door, oblivious to my escape, its dead eyes fixed on the empty seat. The other one had moved to the back, trying to pry open the trunk. They were mindless, relentless. My hands, now both scraped and bleeding, gripped the roof rack of the SUV. I hauled myself up, my muscles screaming in protest. From this elevated position, I could see it all. The skull of the horror was breathtaking. The highway, once a symbol of movement and connection, was now a stagnant river of twisted metal and crumpled bodies. Cars lay abandoned, some with doors ajar, others still running, their engines emitting a mournful hum. Blood, dark and congealed, stained the pristine white lines of the lanes. And everywhere, everywhere, were them. Hundreds, thousands, shambling, lurching figures in a grotesque parade of death. They moved with a singular purpose, drawn by the sound of screams, the scent of the living, or perhaps some deeper, unknowable instinct. They were pouring out of office buildings, surging from underpasses, crawling over the wreckage of multi-car pileups. The once bustling cityscape was a nightmare come to life, a horrifying tableau of urban decay. The sheer number of zombies overrunning the city was incomprehensible. The woman with the lipstick from the car next to mine was now screaming. Her convertible's roof was down, and one of the things, a gray-faced man in a suit, had its head inside, tearing at something I couldn't quite see.
Her screams cut off abruptly, replaced by a gurgling sound. I recoiled, a wave of nausea washing over me. I had to get away from here, now. I started moving, clambering over the roof of the SUV, then onto the hood of a pickup truck. My muscles burned, my breath ragged in my chest. Each step was precarious, the metal slippery with dust and some unseen grime. I kept low, trying to be as inconspicuous as possible, though the futility of such a gesture in this apocalyptic landscape wasn't lost on me. Below, between the vehicles, a lone survivor was trying to make a break for it. A young man, maybe my age, sprinting between a delivery truck and a station wagon. He moved fast, a desperate dash for freedom. He almost made it. Almost. But then, a gray hand snaked out from behind a sedan, grabbing his ankle. He went down, his cry of terror swallowed by the moans of the approaching horde. I didn't stop, couldn't. A cold, hard truth slammed into me. There was no one coming to save us. No sirens, no help, just the relentless, surging tide of the dead. It was every man for himself, and that knowledge, that stark, brutal reality, carved away a piece of my soul. I reached the front of the traffic jam. It wasn't just a jam anymore, it was a wreck. A semi-truck lay overturned, its cargo spilled across the highway. A city bus was jackknifed, its windows shattered, bodies hanging limply from the broken frames. Beyond it, the road dipped, and I could see the chaos stretching on, an unending river of horror. The downtown skyscrapers, usually glittering in the afternoon sun, now seemed to cast long, ominous shadows, their empty windows like dead eyes staring down at the unfolding apocalypse. My gaze drifted to a familiar landmark, the towering glass facade of the First National Bank building, where Ashley worked, just a few blocks away. My heart twisted. Was she in there, trapped, or worse? The thought was a searing brand on my mind. I had to get to her. I had to. I needed a weapon. The emergency hammer was useless. I scanned the chaotic landscape of mangled vehicles and scattered debris.
My eyes locked onto something glinting beneath the overturned semi-truck. A crowbar. Heavy, steel, solid. It was surrounded by a few shuffling figures, drawn to the carnage, but it was reachable. Just. A new surge of adrenaline, cold and fierce, washed over me. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about fight. I was no hero, no soldier, just an ordinary guy stuck in a traffic jam that had become the end of the world. But I wasn't going to let them take me. Not like this. Not without a fight. The crowbar. That was my first step. My pulse throbbed in my ears. The air tasted of burning and blood. This was it. My descent into hell, armed with a plastic hammer and a desperate hope. What would I become in this new, brutal world? I didn't know, but I was about to find out. I slid down the front of the pickup truck, dropping onto the asphalt with a jarring thud that sent pain shooting up my legs. The two zombies nearest the crowbar turned their gray faces towards the sound. One, a woman in office attire, her skirt shredded, started to shamble towards me, her arms outstretched. The other, a burly construction worker, missing half his jaw, seemed to move with a sluggish, powerful menace. My emergency hammer felt pathetic in my hand. I eyed the crowbar again, maybe 15 feet away, gleaming mockingly under the dying sunlight. It was a race. Them to me to it. I had to be faster. "Hey!" I screamed, a raw, desperate sound that ripped from my throat. It was a gamble, drawing attention, but I needed to divert them, even for a second. The office woman lurched, a wet growl escaping her throat. The construction worker tilted his head, a blank, horrifying curiosity in his dead eyes. I sprinted. It felt like my legs were moving through treacle, every muscle screaming. The ground was treacherous, littered with broken glass, car parts, and something wet and sticky that I didn't want to identify. The air was thick with the reek of decay, metallic blood, and burning plastic. My lungs burned with each ragged breath.
The office woman was closer now, her grasping fingers almost brushing my shirt. I swerved, a desperate, clumsy move, narrowly avoiding her grasp. I could feel the cold, clammy air of her approach. Almost there. My fingers closed around the cold, unforgiving steel of the crowbar. It was heavier than I expected, solid and real. A surge of defiant power coursed through me. I didn't hesitate. As the construction worker closed in, I swung the crowbar in a wide, desperate arc. The metal connected with his skull with a sickening crack. It wasn't a clean sound, more like bone splintering, a grotesque percussion in the cacophony of the city. His head snapped back, a geyser of blackish-red fluid exploding from the impact site. He stumbled, a jerky, puppet-like movement, then dropped to the ground with a heavy thud, his limbs twitching for a moment before going still. My arm vibrated with the impact, pain shooting up to my shoulder. My stomach rebelled, a wave of bile rising in my throat. I had just killed someone, or something. The line between them was blurred, terrifyingly so. But there was no time for reflection. The office woman was on me, her rotting fingers digging into my arm. Her strength was startling, impossible. Her grip was like a vice, cold and unyielding. Her face, inches from mine, was a mottled canvas of decay, her teeth stained with dried blood. A guttural moan erupted from her throat, hot, foul breath washing over me. I could feel the tremor in my arm, the tearing of my shirt fabric. I brought the crowbar up, not swinging, but driving it forward like a stake. It plunged into her chest. Not her head, not a killing blow, but enough to create distance. She gasped, a wet, rattling sound, but her grip didn't loosen. Her eyes, milky and dead, stared into mine, utterly devoid of pain or recognition. Only hunger. I twisted the crowbar, leveraging it against her ribs, and pushed with all my might. Her body gave, a sickening crunch of bone and flesh. She finally released her grip, stumbling backward, a gaping wound in her chest. She didn't fall, not yet, just stood there, swaying, reaching for me with twitching fingers. "Stay down, you bastard!" I yelled, my voice hoarse, raw with fear and adrenaline. I swung the crowbar, aiming for her head this time, a desperate primal instinct driving the blow. The impact was even worse than before, a wet, pulpy sound that reverberated through the empty space around us. Her head caved in, a grotesque collapse of bone and brain matter. She dropped like a stone, lying still in a growing puddle of blackish blood. My legs felt like jelly, my breath came in ragged, painful gasps. The crowbar, once a symbol of hope, now felt heavy, soaked in the grim reality of what I had done. I was alive. I had fought. I had killed. And the taste of metallic fear was thick on my tongue. A new sound reached me then, cutting through the general moaning and distant crashes. A rhythmic thump, thump, thump from the underpass, growing steadily louder. It was the collective sound of dozens, maybe hundreds, of shuffling feet. They were converging, drawn by the gunshots, the screams, and now my own desperate shouts. The highway was a funnel, and I was at the narrow end. I needed to move, now. Not back towards my car, not further into the heart of the traffic jam, but somewhere off the highway, somewhere less exposed. My gaze swept the surrounding structures. A dilapidated hardware store, its sign peeling, stood just off the highway, maybe 100 yards away. Its windows were dark, boarded up in places, but it looked solid, a possible refuge. I clutched the crowbar, its weight strangely comforting now, a heavy extension of my will to survive. I started running, not sprinting, but a desperate, lung-burning jog through the maze of abandoned cars. My goal, that hardware store. My hope, that it offered more than just a momentary reprieve. My fear, that it was already infested. I ran past a family sedan, its doors wide open, a child's toy still clutched in a lifeless hand. Past a crumpled taxi, its driver slumped over the wheel, eyes staring sightlessly at the dash. The air was heavy with the stench of death, a sickening perfume that clung to my clothes, my skin, my very soul. I could feel their presence behind me, a creeping dread, the dull, rhythmic thumping growing louder, closer. I glanced over my shoulder. They were there, a tide of them, spilling over the overturned semi, emerging from the shadows beneath the underpass. Their numbers were horrifying, a gray, relentless wave. My sprint turned into a desperate, all-out dash. My legs burned, my lungs screamed for air, but I pushed through the pain. Every step was a prayer, every breath a desperate plea for more time. The hardware store. Closer. Its front door, a heavy metal slab, looked promising. The windows were small, high up, covered in grime. Maybe, just maybe, it was secure. I veered off the highway, scrambling down a small embankment, my feet skidding on loose gravel. My ankle twisted, a sharp pain, but I forced myself to ignore it. The ground here was uneven, littered with discarded trash and overgrown weeds. I stumbled, almost fell, but caught myself on a rusted chain-link fence. The metal ripped through my short sleeve, leaving a jagged tear and a fresh, stinging wound on my forearm. I reached the back alley of the hardware store. A series of rusted dumpsters blocked the path, overflowing with garbage. The smell was horrendous, a mixture of rotting food and something else, something metallic and sickeningly familiar. I pushed through the debris, my heart pounding, the crowbar held tight in my hand. The back entrance to the store was a loading dock, a heavy roll-up metal door, secured by a massive padlock. My heart sank. Locked. Of course it was locked. What did I expect? A welcome mat? I pounded on the metal door, a futile gesture. Hello? Anyone in there? My voice cracked, thin and desperate against the growing din from the highway. No answer. Only the distant, guttural moans, slowly, inexorably getting closer. They were going to find me here, trapped in an alley, between dumpsters and a locked door. Then I saw it.
Not the main door, but a smaller personnel door set into the wall beside the loading dock. It was steel, thick and solid, but the frame looked older, the paint peeling. No padlock, just a heavy-duty doorknob. I tried the knob. Locked. My stomach clenched. Just my luck. Always a locked door, always a dead end. But this wasn't just a doorknob. This was a heavy industrial-grade lock, and I had a crowbar. I wedged the tip of the crowbar under the door frame, near the lock. My hands were shaking, slick with sweat and blood. I leaned into it, putting all my weight into the leverage. The metal groaned, a protesting shriek that seemed to echo down the alley. My muscles screamed in protest. Nothing. The frame held. "Come on, you bastard," I snarled, pushing harder, gritting my teeth. My vision blurred for a second, the pain in my arm radiating up to my shoulder. This was it, my chance, my only chance. A loud metallic thwack from the highway. They had reached the overturned semi. Their moans were a deafening chorus now, a wave of guttural sounds washing over the alley. I could hear the distinct sound of flesh tearing, bone snapping. They were feeding, and they were coming for me. With a final, desperate surge of adrenaline, I put every ounce of my remaining strength into the crowbar. The metal frame shrieked again, louder this time. A sharp crack echoed through the alley, the sound of splintering wood deep within the doorframe. The lock gave. Not fully, but enough. The door shifted inward, a fraction of an inch, revealing a sliver of darkness beyond. "Yes," I gasped, a ragged, triumphant sound. I shoved the crowbar into the gap, leveraging the door open further. The hinges screamed in protest, but they held. I pushed the door open just enough to squeeze through, my body scraping against the rough metal. I slipped inside, pulling the door shut behind me with a desperate heave. It didn't lock, not really, but it was closed. I leaned against it, chest heaving, the crowbar still clutched tight. Darkness enveloped me, a heavy, suffocating blanket. The smell of dust, old wood, and something metallic filled my nostrils. The moaning from outside, though muffled, was still there, a constant reminder of the nightmare I had just escaped. My legs gave out. I slid down the door, collapsing onto the dusty concrete floor. My head swam, my body ached, but I was inside. For now, I was safe. The silence after the roaring chaos of the highway was unnerving. A deep, heavy quiet that pressed in on me, making my ears ring. My own ragged breathing sounded impossibly loud in the gloom. I closed my eyes, trying to calm the frantic pounding in my chest, trying to make sense of the last hour. An hour. That's all it had been. An hour since I was a frustrated commuter. An hour since the world was normal. Now, everything was shattered. The city was a tomb. And I was just one survivor, cowering in a dark hardware store, with a crowbar and a rapidly fading hope. What was I going to do now? Where was I going to go? The city, my home, was gone. And the thought of Ashley, of my parents, out there in that raging storm of death, it was a pain almost too great to bear. But I was alive, and as long as I was alive, I had to keep moving. I had to keep fighting. For them, for myself. The darkness pressed in, full of unknown threats, but I refused to give in. Not yet. My eyes slowly adjusted to the gloom. The interior of the hardware store was a cavernous space, stacked high with shelves, tools, and construction materials. Crates and boxes formed dark, looming shadows, their contents hidden in the oppressive dimness. A faint sliver of light, barely illuminating a patch of dusty concrete, filtered in from a high, grimy window somewhere towards the front. The air was stale, thick with the scent of sawdust, new plastic, and the metallic tang of dried blood that I could still smell on my own clothes. I pushed myself up, wincing as my twisted ankle protested. Each movement was a chore, my muscles stiff and protesting from the exertion and fear. The crowbar felt heavy, a constant reminder of the violence I had witnessed and inflicted. I limped deeper into the store, moving cautiously, every nerve ending screaming. The silence was a lie, I knew, a thin veil over the city's screaming heart. And I had to assume I wasn't alone. My eyes scanned the shelves, my mind already cataloging potential resources. Tools, ropes, barricades, anything. This place, despite its eerie stillness, felt like a sanctuary. A temporary one perhaps, but a sanctuary nonetheless. I moved along an aisle of galvanized pipes, my footsteps echoing unnervingly on the concrete. The sound made me flinch, freezing mid-step, holding my breath. I strained to hear over the thumping of my own heart. Nothing. Just the faint, muffled moans from outside, a constant, low thrum against the thick walls. A glint caught my eye. Flashlights, a whole display of them, near the front of the store. A sudden, desperate need for light, for clarity, welled up inside me. I made my way towards them, moving past displays of power tools, garden equipment, and rows of paint cans. The aisles were narrow, creating a maze of potential hiding spots, but also potential ambushes. Every shadow seemed to stretch and writhe, my mind playing tricks on me, seeing movement where there was none. I reached the flashlight display. Various sizes, various brands. I grabbed a heavy-duty LED model, twisting it on. A strong, pure beam of light cut through the oppressive gloom, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. The sudden brightness was a relief, but also a betrayal, making me feel exposed. I quickly scanned the surrounding area, then lowered the beam, using it sparingly. Batteries. I needed batteries. I found a multi-pack in a nearby bin and stuffed them into my pocket. Water, food, these were my next priorities. My stomach growled, a hollow, painful sound. I hadn't eaten since breakfast, a lifetime ago. I found the small break room at the back, tucked away behind the staff lockers. The door was ajar. I pushed it open slowly, crowbar held high. Empty. A faded coffee maker sat on a counter, next to a stack of dirty mugs. A half-eaten sandwich, covered in green mold, sat on a plate.
The smell of stale coffee and something else, something vaguely sweet and sickly, hung in the air. My light beam swept the room. A small fridge. Hope flared, then dimmed. Empty, of course. But there, on a shelf above the microwave, a dusty box of granola bars. Life-saving. I grabbed them, tearing open the wrapper of one with trembling hands. It was stale, dry, and tasted vaguely of cardboard, but it was calories, it was sustenance. I forced myself to chew, slowly, deliberately, trying to ignore the texture, the taste of dust and desperation. While I ate, I scanned the room for anything else useful. A first aid kit, small and basic, but better than nothing. Band-aids, antiseptic wipes, some pain relievers. I found a clean rag and used it to wrap my bleeding palm. The pain was still there, a dull throb, but at least the bleeding was staunching. My gaze drifted to the break room's only window, a small, high-set pane of frosted glass that looked out onto the alley. I carefully, slowly, climbed onto a flimsy plastic chair to get a better view. Peering through the grime, I could just make out the dumpsters, and beyond them, the shadowy forms of 3 of them still milling around the back door I had just forced. They were drawn to the scent, to the disturbance. They hadn't gone away. They were waiting. My heart sank. The back door, I realized, was a weakness. They would eventually get through. They always did. The city, even the quiet parts, was a death trap. I had to secure it. I climbed down from the chair. My mind was racing, trying to plan, trying to think strategically, something I was wholly unprepared for. This wasn't a spreadsheet or a client presentation. This was life and death. I found a stack of heavy-duty cinder blocks near the loading dock. One by one, I hauled them, grunting with effort, to the back door. The pain in my ankle flared with each step, but I pushed through it. This was survival. This was action. This was all that mattered. It took me 20 minutes, but I managed to build a crude barricade against the inside of the door. 3 layers of cinder blocks, reinforced with a long, thick length of rebar that I found nearby, wedged between the door frame and the blocks. It wasn't perfect, but it would buy me time. Maybe a lot of time. Enough time to figure out what to do next. As I finished, a new sound cut through the muffled moaning from outside. A distant roar, growing louder. It wasn't traffic. It was something heavy. A helicopter? My hope flared. Military? Rescue? I limped towards the front of the store, my flashlight beam cutting a path through the darkness. I found a narrow gap in the boarded-up windows and carefully, slowly, pulled away a sliver of wood, just enough to peer out. The sight that greeted me froze the blood in my veins. The highway, once a river of cars, was now a sea of gray. The overturned semi was completely engulfed, a teeming mass of infected bodies. They swayed, they fed, they moaned. And the sound of the approaching helicopter was now deafening, directly overhead. It was black, sleek, military grade. Not a rescue chopper, but an attack gunship. It circled once, then twice, its powerful searchlight sweeping across the nightmare below. Then the sound of gunfire. Not individual shots, but a continuous, ripping sound, like canvas tearing. The chopper's mounted machine guns opened fire, a relentless stream of tracers pouring down onto the horde below. The infected convulsed, dropped, but others immediately took their place. It was like trying to empty the ocean with a teacup. The air was filled with the smell of gunpowder and burning flesh. But then, a new, more terrifying sound. A high-pitched, whirring whistle, growing louder, faster. Crump! A blinding flash of orange and white light erupted from the highway, followed by a deafening roar that shook the entire hardware store. The building groaned, ceiling tiles rattled, and dust rained down from the rafters. The air was instantly thick with the smell of cordite and burning. Artillery? A missile? They were bombing the highway. The helicopter hovered for a moment, then peeled off, disappearing into the smoke-filled sky. More explosions followed, a series of concussive blasts that rattled my teeth and made my bones vibrate. They weren't trying to contain it. They were trying to eradicate it, to level the city. The sheer brutal finality of it all was overwhelming. This wasn't an isolated incident. This was an apocalypse, and the military was desperate. My mind reeled. Ashley, my parents, were they caught in that? Was the bank building still standing? Was anyone left? A wave of profound despair washed over me, threatening to drown me in its icy depths. The highway, once a river of cars, was now a sea of gray.
I collapsed against the wall, head in my hands, the crowbar clattering beside me. The sounds of war and death raged outside, but inside I was alone, utterly, terribly alone, facing an impossible reality. What now? The thought was a dull ache in my skull. The city, my city, was being destroyed, and I was trapped in it, a rat in a burning maze. I was stuck in a traffic jam that had become a battlefield, and the zombies overran the city with an unholy vengeance. I had to get out. I had to. But how do you escape a war zone when you're caught between the bombs and the dead? How do you escape when there's nowhere left to go? The explosions continued, each one a hammer blow against the last vestiges of my hope. Hours passed, marked only by the shifting light outside and the intermittent explosions that still rocked the building. The sun, once a source of warmth and life, had become a cruel, distant orb, its light struggling to penetrate the thick, smoke-laden haze that now choked the city. The air I breathed was heavy with dust and the metallic tang of burning. My throat was raw, my eyes gritty. I sat huddled in a narrow aisle between stacks of insulation, the flashlight beam a weak circle on the concrete floor. The granola bars were gone, swallowed by a hunger that still gnawed at my stomach. My water bottle, found in the break room, was half empty. Each sip was rationed, savored. Every resource was precious now. My mind drifting, caught in a swirling vortex of fear and memory. Ashley, her laugh, the way she'd always been able to cheer me up, no matter how bad things got. My parents, their stubborn love, their unwavering support. Were they okay? Had they made it out? The question was a torment, a wound that bled afresh with every passing moment. I pictured them, safe, somewhere far away, and clung to that image like a drowning man to a spar. It was a flimsy hope, but it was all I had. The silence, when the explosions finally died down, was even more terrifying than the noise. A profound, aching quiet, broken only by the distant, mournful moans of the infected and the faint, unsettling creak of the building around me. The city was dying, slowly, terribly, and I was witnessing its demise, piece by agonizing piece. My gaze fell on the crowbar, leaning against a shelf. My hands still throbbed, raw and blistered from gripping it. The image of the construction worker, his skull caving in, flashed behind my eyes. I shuddered. Was this who I was now? A killer? Just hours ago I was worried about a client presentation, about paying my utility bill. Now my worries were primal. Eat, drink, survive, kill. The transformation had been brutal, swift, and utterly irreversible. A faint scratching sound came from the front of the store, barely audible over the ringing in my ears, but enough to snap me back to the present. My heart leaped into my throat. They were here, or something was here. I gripped the crowbar, my knuckles white, muscles tensed. I aimed the flashlight beam towards the sound, but saw nothing. The shadows played tricks. I held my breath, listening. The scratching came again, a rhythmic scritch, 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 unmistakably coming from behind the boarded-up front window. One of them trying to get in, or perhaps already inside. A wave of cold sweat broke out on my forehead. My imagination, fueled by adrenaline and fear, conjured grotesque images. Dead, grasping fingers tearing away the flimsy wood, a decaying face pressing against the glass. I needed to see, I needed to know. Slowly, carefully, I crept towards the front, my limping gait muffled by the insulation. Each step was deliberate, measured.
The light from my flashlight remained off, leaving me to the oppressive darkness, broken only by the thin slivers of ambient light seeping through the boarded windows. I reached the front of the store, the flashlight held ready. The scratching had stopped. The silence was absolute, heavy, almost suffocating. Too quiet. My instincts screamed at me. I peered through a small gap in the boards of one of the windows, pulling aside a torn piece of cardboard. The street outside was a nightmare. Cars, burned-out husks, littered the asphalt. Bodies, both human and infected, lay scattered like forgotten dolls. The once bustling intersection was a graveyard. The air shimmered with heat from distant fires, painting the sky a bruised purple-orange. And there, standing directly in front of the window, was one of them. It was a woman, her clothes torn, her hair matted. Her face was a ruin, eyes sunken, skin a sallow gray. One arm hung limp, broken, but the other was raised, fingers pressed against the glass, making that soft, insistent scritch-scritch sound I had heard. It wasn't looking in. It was looking out, staring blankly at the ruined street, swaying gently as if lost. It hadn't heard me. It hadn't noticed me. A profound sense of pity, unexpected and unwelcome, washed over me. This thing, this monster, had once been someone. Had a life, a family, dreams. Now it was just a husk, driven by a terrible, relentless instinct. The thought was a bitter poison. How many more? How many hundreds, thousands, millions more were out there, lost to this horrific plague? The sheer scale of the tragedy was mind-numbing. I carefully let the cardboard fall back into place, sealing the gap. The scratching resumed, a faint, rhythmic reminder of the world outside. I backed away, my mind reeling.
My fear was still there, a constant companion, but now it was tinged with a deep, aching sadness. My gaze swept the store again, this time with a new purpose. This place was a fortress of sorts, but it wouldn't hold forever. I needed to plan. I needed to move. The image of Ashley, her text message, a phantom buzz in my memory, spurred me forward. I wasn't going to hide here until they finally broke through. I was going to find a way out. But where and how? The city was a death trap. Every street, every alley, every building was a potential graveyard. The thought of venturing back out there, into that living hell, made my stomach clench. I found a large, detailed map of the city hanging on a bulletin board in the back office. It was dusty, yellowed, but legible. I pulled it down, spreading it out on a cleared section of floor, illuminating it with my flashlight. My fingers traced the familiar streets, the arterial highways that were now choked with death. My apartment, Ashley's bank, my parents' suburban house, miles away, across the river. They all seemed impossibly distant, unreachable. The river, that was it. The river formed a natural barrier around the downtown core. If I could get to one of the bridges, cross it, I might have a chance of getting out, away from the densest part of the city, away from where the bombs had fallen, away from the worst of the zombies overrunning the city. I traced a possible route with my finger. It involved navigating a few blocks of side streets, then crossing through what looked like a small industrial park before reaching the main bridge leading out of the city to the west. It wouldn't be easy. It wouldn't be safe. But it was a plan. A desperate, terrifying plan. I needed supplies, more water, something to eat, something more substantial than stale granola, a backpack, something sturdy, and more weapons. The crowbar was good, but a firearm, even a small one, would make a difference. The hardware store likely wouldn't have guns, but it might have something else, a machete, an axe, anything that could create more distance, more impact. I spent the next few hours meticulously searching the store. My ankle ached, a constant throb, but the adrenaline kept me going. I found a sturdy canvas backpack, stuffed it with bottles of water, more granola bars, a few cans of emergency rations, surprisingly, this store stocked them, and a roll of duct tape. Duct tape, the universal fix-it. In the tools section, I found a hatchet. It wasn't an axe, but it was sharp, well-balanced, and felt surprisingly good in my hand.
A hunting knife, too, small but wickedly sharp. I strapped it to my belt, a new, heavy weight that felt strangely comforting. As I worked, I kept an ear on the outside.
The scratching at the front window had ceased. The moaning was still there, a constant, low hum. But it sounded more distant now, less intense. Were they moving, or were my senses just dulled by exhaustion and stress? I looked at my watch. The display was dead. The power was out. I had no idea what time it was. Dawn? Dusk? The world had become a timeless void, marked only by the grim cycle of survival. My plan solidified. I would wait until the early morning hours, when the light was dim but visibility still offered some advantage. The infected, I'd noticed from my brief observation on the highway, seemed to be less active in deeper darkness, though still dangerous. They were attracted to sound and movement. Stealth would be my ally. I checked my makeshift barricade on the back door. It looked solid, for now. I found a stack of lumber and reinforced the front windows, adding extra layers of wood, securing them with nails and the crowbar. The hammering sounds were loud, jarring in the quiet, but I reasoned it was better to be safe now than sorry later. They might draw attention, but the more secure I was, the better my chances. As I worked, I wrestled with the constant, gnawing question. Ashley, my parents. Was it selfish to try and save myself? Or was it necessary to survive so I could find them? I clung to the latter, a lifeline in the churning sea of despair. I had to believe they were out there, waiting for me. And I had to be strong enough to reach them. I settled down for what I hoped would be a few hours of uneasy rest. My body ached, my mind was a whirlwind of fear and exhaustion. But I felt a strange sense of resolve. I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was planning. I was fighting back. As I drifted into a restless, nightmare-filled sleep, my last conscious thought was of the map, etched into my mind. The river, the bridge. A desperate hope, a terrifying journey. The city still burned, the dead still walked, but somewhere, deep inside, a flicker of defiance refused to die. I was still alive. And as long as I was, the fight wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I awoke with a gasp, my body rigid, heart hammering against my ribs. The dreams had been vivid, horrifying. The floral-dressed zombie, the construction worker, Ashley's face dissolving into a gray, lifeless mask. I pushed myself up, shaking, my throat dry. The silence of the store was still absolute, save for my own ragged breathing. My flashlight, which I'd left on low, cast a weak circle on the floor. It was still dark. Not pitch black, but that oppressive, pre-dawn gloom that seemed to amplify every sound, every shadow. My stomach growled, a hollow, desperate sound. The granola bars had done little to sate the gnawing hunger. My body ached, the cuts on my hands throbbed. My ankle was swollen, a dull, constant pain that made every step a wince. But my mind was clearer, sharper. The nightmares, instead of breaking me, had solidified my resolve. I had to move. The hardware store was a cage, not a refuge. I retrieved my backpack, checking its contents again. Water, food, first aid kit, duct tape, hatchet, knife. A small coil of rope found near the camping section was a bonus. I adjusted the straps, feeling the unfamiliar weight on my shoulders. This was my life now, carried on my back. I moved to the front of the store, carefully peering through a gap in the boarded windows. The street was still, eerily so. A few scattered figures shuffled aimlessly in the distance, but the immediate vicinity was clear. The air was cool, almost cold, carrying the acrid scent of ash and decay. The sky was a deep, bruised purple, the first faint hint of gray on the eastern horizon, promising a new day in hell. My plan was simple: get to the river, cross the bridge, and head west, away from the sprawling metropolis, away from the concentrated nightmare that was the city. It was a straight shot, a few miles, but those few miles might as well have been a continent.
I gripped a crowbar in one hand, the hatchet in the other, feeling the comfort and brutal weight of the steel. This was my armor, my shield, my weapon, my only hope. I checked the barricaded front door. It was heavy, reinforced with the lumber I'd added, but the lock was still broken. I'd have to keep it held shut, slip out, then try to resecure it. A desperate, risky maneuver. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the frantic pounding of my heart. This was it, the real test, the open loop of my survival. "Here we go," I whispered, my voice hoarse, a thin tremor in the quiet. Time to face the music. With a grunt, I braced myself against the door. Slowly, carefully, I pushed. The lumber groaned against the frame, but held. I created a narrow gap, just wide enough for me to slip through. I peered out, scanning the street left and right. Empty, for now. I slipped out, my backpack snagging on the doorframe. I pulled hard, tearing another rip in my already ruined shirt. But I was out. I turned, trying to resecure the door, but it was too awkward, too heavy. The lumber was useless from the outside. I cursed under my breath. It would have to do. The next person or thing that came along could push it open. But I couldn't dwell on that. I had to move. My ankle protested with every step, a dull, aching throb, but I forced myself to ignore it. I moved with a limping, shuffling gait, keeping close to the buildings, staying in the shadows. The city felt different in the pre-dawn light, more menacing.
The silence was unnerving, broken only by the distant moans and the occasional sound of metal twisting in the wind, a mournful dirge for a dead world. I passed a parked police cruiser, its windows shattered, the seats ripped. No officer in sight. A chilling thought. Were they all gone? Overwhelmed? Or had they simply fled like everyone else? The authority, the structure, the illusion of safety, all gone, vanished in a single terrifying day. My route took me through a residential neighborhood, quiet and eerie. Houses stood with darkened windows, doors ajar, cars left haphazardly in driveways. A child's bicycle lay on its side on a lawn, its front wheel still spinning slowly in the breeze. A chilling tableau of lives abruptly interrupted, shattered, gone. The normalcy of it all, juxtaposed with the horror, was sickening. What would I miss most from the world before? The sheer, mundane boringness of it, the peace, the predictability. A sudden noise, a rustle from behind a hedge. I froze, hatchet raised, crowbar ready. My heart hammered, a frantic drum against my ribs. I held my breath, straining to hear. Nothing, just the wind, playing tricks, or so I hoped. I moved on, my paranoia a constant companion. Every shadow was a potential threat, every sound a prelude to doom. My senses were heightened, stretched to their breaking point. The exhaustion, the hunger, the constant fear, it was all taking its toll. I reached the industrial park, a maze of warehouses, loading docks, and deserted parking lots. It was wider, more exposed, offering fewer places to hide. My anxiety ratcheted up. I moved faster, my limping gait turning into a desperate shuffling run. A sudden movement. A figure emerged from between two large warehouses, stumbling into the dim light. Not one, three. They were drawn by the sound of my movement, however slight. Their heads snapped towards me, eyes empty, jaw slack. They began to shamble forward, a low, guttural chorus erupting from their throats. "Damn it," I cursed under my breath. Too many. I couldn't fight three of them head-on, not with my injured ankle, not in this open space. I needed to evade. I turned sharply, ducking behind a stack of rusted metal pipes. They lumbered past, their attention momentarily lost. But I knew it wouldn't last. They were relentless. I had to create a distraction. My eyes scanned the environment. A forklift, keys still in the ignition, stood near a loading dock. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble, but it was my only option. I sprinted for the forklift, my ankle screaming in protest.
The infected, realizing their mistake, turned, their moans growing louder, more urgent. They were gaining on me. I reached the forklift, my hands fumbling for the keys.
They were cold, metallic, almost slipping from my sweaty grasp. I jammed the key into the ignition, twisted. Nothing, just a click, a dead battery. My heart sank. Despair, sharp and bitter, rose in my throat. This was it. "No!" I screamed, a raw, primal sound of defiance. I slammed my fist against the dashboard. Just one click again. Then, a wheezing cough from the engine, a sputter, and with a roar, it sprang to life. I slammed the forklift into reverse, the tires screeching on the asphalt. The infected were right on me. I saw the lead one, a man in a greasy mechanic's uniform, stumble forward, its hands outstretched. I swung the forklift around, the heavy counterweight crashing into the side of the warehouse, sending a shower of sparks and debris. The noise was deafening, a desperate symphony of roaring engine, crashing metal, and their guttural moans. It was enough to draw them in. I had created my distraction. I slammed the forklift into drive, aiming it directly at a stack of empty pallets near the edge of the industrial park. The plan was half-formed, desperate, but I had to try. I needed to get over the perimeter fence. The forklift crashed into the pallets with a deafening roar of splintering wood and crunching metal. The stack collapsed, creating a ramp, a messy, unstable ramp of broken timber. I didn't hesitate. I gunned the engine, driving the forklift up the makeshift ramp. The forklift lurched, straining, its tires spinning on the loose wood. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white, my whole body tense. It was going to tip. I was going to die, crushed beneath a forklift, surrounded by the dead. But it didn't. With a final, desperate surge, the forklift climbed over the fence, teetering precariously, then dropping to the ground with a bone-jarring thud. I was out of the industrial park, out of the immediate danger. I killed the engine. The sudden silence was deafening, a stark contrast to the roaring chaos I had just unleashed. I could still hear them, their moans now distant, drawn by the sound of the forklift, by the crashing pallets, by the sheer, overwhelming noise. I had bought myself time, precious, agonizing time. I climbed out of the forklift, my legs trembling, barely able to support my weight. My ankles screamed in protest. I looked back at the industrial park, at the hundreds of gray forms now swarming the forklift, drawn by the sound, by the promise of flesh. The sight was a grotesque tapestry of death, a chilling reminder of the scale of this nightmare. I turned away, forcing myself to move. The bridge, it was close now. I could see its towering steel framework in the pre-dawn gloom, a beacon of hope, a symbol of escape. My hope, though fragile, had been rekindled. My exhaustion was absolute, a crushing weight that threatened to pull me down. But I pushed through it, fueled by the desperate, burning need to survive, to find my family. The sun was beginning to peek over the eastern horizon now, painting the sky in hues of orange and red, a cruel, beautiful mockery of a new dawn in a world that had ended. The city, my home, was a funeral pyre against the bruised sky, and I was just one ghost escaping the flames. But where exactly was I going? The bridge was my next obstacle, my next chance, and I knew with a chilling certainty that it wouldn't be easy. The city was far from done with me yet. The bridge loomed ahead, a colossal steel leviathan against the burgeoning dawn sky. It spanned the river, a dark, churning ribbon below, connecting what remained of my city to the unknown. My heart hammered, a mix of desperate hope and chilling dread. This was the final hurdle, the last line of defense, and it was going to be a nightmare. As I approached, the scale of the devastation became brutally clear. The bridge was a graveyard. Dozens of cars, their metal twisted into grotesque sculptures, lay scattered across the lanes. Many were burned out husks, their interiors charred, their windows shattered.
The railing on one side was bent inwards, the gaping maw of broken concrete and twisted rebar, where some desperate souls had plunged to their final demise in the river below. And everywhere were the infected. They were less dense than on the highway, perhaps thinned out by the river's natural barrier or the military's brutal cleanup. But they were still there. Shambling figures, caught in the eternal traffic jam of the apocalypse, wandering aimlessly among the wreckage, drawn to whatever last vestiges of life remained. Some were caught on the bridge's railings, swaying precariously, their dead eyes staring into the murky depths below. The sun, now fully risen, cast long, distorted shadows, turning the scene into a horrifying tableau of urban decay. The air was thick with the stench of decay, burning plastic, and the metallic tang of dried blood. My stomach churned. This was it, the gauntlet. My ankle screamed in protest with every step, a dull, relentless ache. My throat was raw, my eyes gritty with exhaustion. Every muscle in my body felt like lead, but I couldn't stop. Ashley, my parents. The thought was a burning ember in my chest, fueling my weary limbs. I moved on to the bridge, keeping low, sticking to the shadows cast by the wrecked vehicles. The crowbar was heavy in my hand, a brutal, comforting weight. The hatchet was strapped to my hip, a silent promise of violence. I was no warrior, but I was learning to fight, learning to kill, learning to survive. A shuffling sound from behind an overturned bus. I froze, pressing myself against the twisted metal of a mangled sedan. My breath hitched in my throat. Two of them. A businessman, his suit torn, and a woman in a bright yellow dress, now smeared with grime and blood. They were slowly making their way towards me, their dead eyes fixed on some unseen point in the distance. They hadn't seen me, not yet. I waited, my heart hammering, the sound impossibly loud in the eerie silence of the bridge. They shuffled past, their footsteps dragging, a grotesque parody of life. I let out a slow, silent breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Too close, always too close. My route was a perilous dance through the wreckage. I climbed over cars, squeezed between twisted metal, constantly scanning, constantly listening. The bridge felt vast, exposed, every step a gamble. The height, combined with the swaying, lurching figures, created a dizzying sense of vertigo. I kept my eyes fixed on the other side, on the promise of escape. Halfway across, I heard it. A faint, distant sound. Not a moan, not an explosion. A dog's bark. A yelp. Then another, closer. My head snapped up. A small white terrier, dirty and terrified, was darting between the cars, yelping frantically. It was being chased. By two of them. They were slower than the dog, but relentless. The dog was cornered now, whimpering, trapped between a broken-down SUV and the bridge railing. The infected were closing in. My first instinct was to keep going, self-preservation. This wasn't my fight. I had to focus on getting out, on finding Ashley. But the dog's whimpers, so helpless, so terrified, pierced through my hardened resolve. It was a living thing, a creature of the old world, caught in this new, brutal hell. Damn it, I muttered, a low curse torn from my throat. I couldn't leave it, not like that. What would Ashley say? What would I say to myself if I just turned my back? I changed direction, moving towards the dog. My ankle protested, a searing pain, but I pushed through it. The two infected chasing the dog immediately turned their dead eyes towards me, drawn by my movement, my sound. A low growl rumbled in their chests. "Hey!" I shouted, a desperate, raw sound. "Over here, you bastards!" They focused on me, their lumbering pace quickening. The dog, sensing a momentary reprieve, darted under the SUV, whimpering softly. I met the first one head-on. It was a man, his face half-eaten, a gaping wound where his eye should have been. I didn't hesitate. I swung the crowbar in a wide, powerful arc, aiming for the head. The impact was sickening, a wet thud of bone and brain. He dropped. The second one, a woman with long dark hair, was immediately on me. I swung the crowbar in a wide, powerful arc, aiming for the head. The impact was sickening, a wet thud of bone and brain. He dropped. The second one, a woman with long dark hair, was immediately on me.
She moved with surprising speed, her grasping fingers tearing at my shirt. I felt her cold, clammy touch, her foul breath on my face. I brought the hatchet up, a swift, brutal movement, plunging it into her shoulder. She shrieked, a wet, rattling sound, but her grip didn't loosen. I twisted the hatchet, pulling it free, and swung again, this time aiming for her head. It was a messy, brutal blow, but effective. Her head snapped to the side, and she dropped. My breath came in ragged gasps. My arm throbbed from the exertion. My stomach churned with revulsion. Two more lives taken, or rather, ended. The dog, a small white blur, peeked out from under the SUV, then, slowly, cautiously emerged, its tail tucked between its legs, whimpering softly. I lowered the crowbar, trying to make myself seem less threatening. "Hey there, boy," I whispered, my voice hoarse. "It's okay. You're safe now." The dog whimpered again, but didn't run. It stared at me with wide, terrified eyes, then, slowly, hesitantly, wagged its tail. A tiny, fragile flicker of hope in the overwhelming darkness. I knelt down, wincing at the pain in my ankle. The dog, still wary, approached cautiously, sniffing at my outstretched hand. I gently stroked its matted fur. It was bone-thin, filthy, but alive. A survivor, just like me. "Come on," I said, my voice softer now. "Let's get out of here." The dog, as if understanding, padded silently beside me as I resumed my journey. Its presence was a comfort, a small reminder of the world that was. We made our way towards the other side of the bridge. The crossing seemed endless, a continuous dance between dead cars and the walking dead. The dog, surprisingly nimble, navigated the wreckage with ease, occasionally nudging my hand, a silent reassurance. It helped me keep my wits about me, to focus on something other than the crushing despair. As we neared the end of the bridge, a sudden, piercing shriek ripped through the air. Not a zombie, a living human. It came from beneath the bridge, from the support pilings below. My blood ran cold. Other survivors, trapped. My first instinct, again, was to ignore it, to keep moving, to cross the bridge and not look back. But the dog nudged my hand, its soft brown eyes looking up at me, a silent plea. "Damn it," I muttered, my resolve wavering. I couldn't just leave them, not after saving the dog. This was the dilemma, the impossible choice. Self-preservation or human connection. In this new world, perhaps they were one and the same. What would you have done? I still don't know if I made the right choice. I moved to the side of the bridge, peering down into the murky depths below. The pilings, massive concrete supports, were riddled with makeshift shelters, tarps strung between the steel girders. A small fire crackled, sending plumes of smoke curling into the air. And there, huddled on a narrow ledge, were two figures. A man and a woman, both young, terrified. One of them, the woman, was screaming. A single infected, its body covered in river grime, was clawing its way up the support piling, its dead eyes fixed on the trapped survivors. It was almost there, its grasping fingers just inches from the woman's foot. They were trapped, with nowhere to go. "Hold on!" I shouted, my voice raw. They looked up, their faces a mask of terror and disbelief. Hope, fragile and desperate, flickered in their eyes. I scanned the bridge railing. A thick, rusted chain, probably used to secure some construction equipment, was still attached to the metal. It looked sturdy, just long enough. I could lower it down to them, maybe. "The chain!" I yelled, pointing. "Grab the chain!" The man understood immediately. He scrambled to his feet,
grabbing the chain, pulling it taut. But the infected was closer now, its fingers brushing the woman's shoe. I didn't think. I swung the crowbar, not at the infected, but at the chain, using it to bash the shackle open. The metal shrieked in protest, then with a loud clang, it gave way. The chain swung free, dangling precariously over the edge. "Catch it!" I yelled. The man, with a desperate lunge, caught the chain, securing it to the railing below. The infected below screamed, a terrible, frustrated sound, as its prey seemed to slip away. I had bought them precious seconds. "Climb!" I screamed. "Get up here, now!" The woman started to climb, her movements slow, hampered by fear and exhaustion. The infected below was still clawing, still reaching. Its moans were a relentless drumbeat against the steel. The dog, sensing the danger, barked furiously, a small, defiant sound that seemed to egg them on. The woman reached the top, scrambling over the railing with a grunt. Her face was streaked with tears and grime, but her eyes were alive, full of desperate gratitude. "Thank you," she choked out, her voice raw. "Oh God, thank you." The man followed, pulling himself up with an effort. He was older than he looked, exhaustion etched deep into his features. "You saved us," he said, his voice trembling. "Thank you." "No time," I gasped, pointing towards the other side of the bridge. "We need to go, now, before more come." They nodded, understanding. The dog, sensing our urgency, trotted ahead, a silent sentinel. The three of us, unlikely allies, began our final, desperate sprint towards the end of the bridge. The further we got, the more sparse the infected became.
The air, though still thick with the scent of decay, felt lighter, less oppressive. The sounds of the city, the moans, the distant crashes were fading behind us, replaced by the faint chirping of unseen birds. It was a small sound, almost lost in the vastness of the ruined world, but it was a sound of life, a sound of hope. We finally reached the end of the bridge, stepping off the asphalt onto a dirt path that led into a sparse, overgrown forest. The silence here was profound, a shocking contrast to the relentless noise of the city. I looked back at the bridge, at the sprawling, burning nightmare that was once my home. The city, where I'd been stuck in a traffic jam as the zombies overran the city, was now a funeral pyre, a monument to a world lost forever. The woman, whose name I learned was Sarah, collapsed onto the dirt, sobbing, her body racked with tremors. The man, Mark, put a comforting arm around her, his own face pale, exhausted. The dog, whose name I would later learn was Buster, nudged my hand, then lay down at my feet, its tired eyes looking up at me. I stood there, crowbar hanging loosely in my hand, my breath ragged, my body screaming with pain and exhaustion. We had made it. We had escaped. But to what? The forest, dark and foreboding, stretched out before us, an unknown, silent promise of new dangers. "Where do we go?" Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. I looked at them, at Sarah, trembling but alive, at Mark, broken but resilient, at Buster, a loyal, living link to the past, at my new, unexpected companions. We were a fragile, desperate unit, thrown together by the brutal hand of fate. We had lost everything, but we still had each other. And that, I realized, was everything. "West," I said, my voice hoarse but firm. "Away from the cities. We find somewhere safe, somewhere defensible." Mark looked at me, his eyes full of a weary hope. "You think there's an end to this?" I thought about Ashley, about my parents, about the world I had lost, about the sheer, overwhelming scale of the horror I had witnessed. "No," I said honestly. "I don't think this ends. This is how the world is now. But we're still alive, and that has to mean something." Sarah, wiping her tears, nodded slowly. "It means we keep going." "One day at a time," Mark added, a faint, almost imperceptible tremor of resolve in his voice. Buster barked softly, a small, hopeful sound. I looked at the rising sun, painting the horizon in hues of orange and gold.
a cruel reminder of new beginnings in a world that had none. I was alive, but was this truly living? And what exactly was waiting for us just beyond the next hill, in the endless, shattered landscape of this new, terrifying world? I didn't know.
But for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I wasn't alone. And that, I realized, was a stronger reason to fight than any I had known before. We would survive, one step at a time. The journey had just begun.